Mastabas are formal tombs in Egypt, and they actually predate the use of pyramids. In fact, they will become pyramids in many ways. And a mastaba is just a flat rectangular form that would have held a tomb. Actually, that's a misnomer. The tomb is underneath it. It would have held a small chapel, and it's basically a representation of an artificial mountain getting you closer to the afterlife, which exists, as in many societies, in the sky above. We often see rectangular forms, as I said, either stone or mud brick, probably based on socioeconomic status as well as geography. The burial chamber is actually, as I said, beneath the mastaba. It is under the ground, and we tend to do that as humans because the afterlife, underground, tend to be associated, at least the physical element. So we have, for example, the afterlife in ancient Greece or among the Aztec and the Mayans, which is generally held to be underground, even though the gods and the spirits exist in the sky. So you see, you kind of get this height and cave-like structure, subterranean structure at the same time. So what we have in our mastaba is basically our tomb with a shaft that always runs into it. This is to give the spirit access to the rays of the sun, which will help transport them to the afterlife. And then we have a chapel. There's always a false door because you don't actually want a door into the tomb. They don't want to visit their loved ones, not that closely. But it is a representation. This is where one would pray or speak to the person who's actually under here. And then we would have a chamber for a statue, for a Ka statue, K-A. And that statue, if the body were to break down, would become the home of the spirit, the terrestrial home for that spirit, should it be necessary. It's that insurance policy that I was referring to earlier on. And what we have here is really a depiction of the mastaba. So we have that brick, we have the shaft down to the burial chamber, and then we have the statue. Sometimes the statue can be much larger than others, as well as the chapel for offerings. This is ancestor worship. That chapel is there because you would visit your deceased relatives. It would be very important to you as an Egyptian. And here's one example of a mastaba. This is quite a large mastaba. But here we see a ceremonial entrance. So you would come in, there would be this courtyard, again, very large version. And here we see this entrance into the tomb itself, or into the chapel, really. The chapel would be here with that false door. So you see that opening at the far end. It gives the impression of the false door. And then we would have the statue off to one side. It could be visited, but it wasn't actually part of the chapel. It's always off and away, sort of separating the idea of death from the idea of the celebration of life. We do the same thing today. Oftentimes we will have photos or images in our home of a deceased loved one, but how many actually visit the grave?